Hey, I've been reading Deuteronomy for the last past few weeks, and one thing I realize is when Israel's journey from Egypt to the land of Canaan, they had a rough time, right? Um, there's a lot of speculation surrounding this journey. It took them 40 years, and it's just inconceivable to many people how it could have possibly took them so long. This is actually one of the stories that people use to invalidate the Bible because it's inconceivable to them how it could have took anybody, let alone a group of people that was being led by God, to get to such a short distance in 40 years, right? So this story right here, it's real interesting, but when reading it, I think people overlook what's really taking place. All right, it took them 40 years, right? And the most common explanation for why it took them so long is because of how stubborn and rebellious they was, right? It took them 40 years because they were stubborn and rebellious, of course. But why did it really take them 40 years? That's kind of like that's just a more simple explanation, but it may not bring any clarification to anyone who's seeking to know who God is or to understand his word, you know. And God here in Deuteronomy chapter 8, there's more of an explanation on why it actually took Israel so long. All right. So what's going on right here in this passage, our Father, Yahweh, is explaining to Israel why he did the things he did to them. He's letting them know what he expects from them when they go into this land. He's telling them about worshiping other gods, false gods. He's basically just explaining who he is, and he just wants them to know. He's trying to instill it in them, right? Because they just left from Egypt, where Egypt was worshiping many other gods, false gods, right? While Israel was over there, they picked up a lot of their practices. So this is what's taking place while they're traveling from Egypt to Canaan. He's letting them know, I know you've been around false gods. So that's why he's instilling it into them about false gods, because they've been in Egypt for 400 years around false gods. So that's what a lot of the Old Testament is to him, is basically him explaining to them, don't worship the sun, the moon, the stars, all these things, right? And right here in Deuteronomy chapter 8, he's basically explaining to them, verse 2 in chapter 8 says, "And you shall remember that Yahuwah, your God, led you all the way these 40 years in the wilderness, to humble you, prove you, to know what is in your heart, whether you guard his commands or not." So these are a few of the reasons right here, right? That it took them so long, because it was God's will, God's will. And what he was doing was humbling them, trying to prove them, to know what was in their heart, whether they would guard his commands or not. So that's why it took them 40 years. Of course, they were stubborn and rebellious, but it's deeper than that. This was a part of God's will. He was doing things in the period of that 40 years, that shaping and molding these people into a set apart people. Verse 3 also says, "He humbled you, Israel, and let you suffer hunger, and fed you with manna which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, to make you know that man does not live by bread alone, but by all that comes from the mouth of God." So it says he humbled them and let them suffer hunger. Now, someone may ask themselves, why would God allow anyone, let alone his own children, suffer hunger? But that's thinking from a fleshly perspective. That's us thinking from a human perspective again. See, people think that having a relationship with God is about having the best things in life, being on top, having the best cars, the nicest houses. This is what we have been trained to think about God. But that is actually the opposite of what it means to have a relationship with him. He allowed these people to suffer hunger. He fed them with manna in the desert, and it says, which you did not know, nor did your fathers know. And the reason that he said that it was a bread that they didn't know, he wanted Israel to know that this is his doing. It came from him. Their fathers didn't know nothing about this manna. They knew nothing about this manna. He wanted them to know that this was his doing. He gave them the bare minimum to humble them, to change their character. And that's what it's like to have a relationship with God. It's not about having the nicest things in life. Uh, he let them barely get by to keep them in a certain position, to keep their mind at a certain position, to keep their hearts near him. And a lot of the times today, people are preaching a different God. He wants you to have this nice house or these nice clothes. And these people wore the same clothes for 40 years. The same clothes for 40 years. Uh, it says, your garments did not wear out on you, nor did your feet swell these 40 years. They wore the same clothes, but he kept them healthy. Their feet didn't swell, their clothes didn't wear out. But what I'm saying is, his nature, he does things to accomplish his will. And if you're walking if you're walking with God and you want to maintain a healthy relationship with him, you have to keep these things in mind. Most of the times, 99% of the times, the things that we want is not what he wants for us. We have we think differently. He thinks differently than we do. We think like Israel. Israel was thinking, why did you bring us out of the land of Egypt to make us die in the desert? That's how we think. But God has something else on his mind, right? He knows what's best for these people. He gave them the bare minimum, bread, but they wanted meat. That's what it's like to have a relationship with God. You want this, but he wants you to have this. You might want that nice car, but he just wants you to have a car just to get around. And especially people in America, we have to keep these things in mind because it's very hard to walk in a healthy relationship with him in this country specifically without idolizing or being obsessed with material things. We have come so far from God. We don't even realize his voice. We don't understand his nature. We have been trained to think that he wants us to chase our dreams and our goals and to have all these nice things. That's not who he is. He wants the opposite for us. He cares about what's in our heart. He cares about our character and things like that. Whatever it takes to keep us humble, because all of these things that we want are going to pass away. And there is not anyone out there that can deny that the Bible is valid right now, because most of these things are coming in true. That's why he told us to not be a part of the world, because as you can see, the world is obviously passing away. Obviously, all the material things like inflation, if you just look at it, everyone's money in there. If you've been saving money over the last few years, you're losing it. Even if it just sits in there, you're losing it because of inflation. All these things are just disappearing. And if you read the New Testament, Yeshua, whom the world calls Jesus, that's why he said, do not store up your treasures on earth, but store them up in heaven. Because down here on earth, nothing lasts, man. None of this stuff lasts. And we need to stop playing and realize who God is. Get to know him. You have to get your heart out of this world. You need to use this time now to condition yourself to not want this world. You see what he did to Israel. They had a tough journey in the wilderness for 40 years. They didn't have the nicest things. They didn't have the best things. They were complaining the whole time. That's what it's like to have a relationship with God. He's keeping you at a certain point where your spirit can be preserved. Walking with him all the time is not easy. It's actually harder than being in the world, because in the world you can do what you want. You don't have anyone to answer to. You don't have to continue to grow. The more you know, the more you're held accountable for. You don't have to do all that stuff in the world, but when you're walking with him, it's different. And the God that this world is talking about, a lot of the God in a lot of that these churches and stuff is preaching about and stuff like that, that's not the God of the Bible. And people need to start reading his word and understand who he is. And you'll find out a lot about that in Deuteronomy. If you just look at what he did to Israel, the first generation didn't even make it there. The first generation didn't make it there because they were so stubborn and rebellious, and they shaped a golden calf. So he promised them, including Aaron and Moses, that they wouldn't, make it to the promised land. And that's how serious God is. We need to understand how serious he is, how severe his will is. You don't want to find out the hard way, because you're going to find out one way or another. But it's best that you just try. Don't make him do it, because then you're gonna be complaining like Israel, because he's gonna put you through adversity, and take some things from you. It's best if you just try to do it yourself. But the reason that I brought this journey with Israel up is because it allows us to know his nature. So once you get to know his word, you get to know him more, you can tell whether something is coming from him or not. I know that the God that these people are talking about is not the same God that I worship, because that's not his nature. He doesn't care about us chasing our dreams and our goals and having all these nice things, living this life that's not even real. So get to know him for yourself, man. Know what his voice is. Know who his nature is. And basically, it also says, if you, in Deuteronomy chapter 8, I'm going to read one more verse. He said, thus you shall know in your heart that as a man disciplines his son, so Yahuwah, your God, disciplines you. All right. So when you walk with him, he will discipline you. He will. He's a real serious God. Of course, he's loving. Of course, he's kind. We all know this because he sent his son to die on the cross for our sins. So we know he's grace. He's merciful. We know how much grace he has because he's shown that to us. But what we ignore is the severity of his will.